All right, welcome everyone. I think we're going to get started. Good afternoon. Our favorite time of the day is the post-lunch time. Hopefully you all had a little bit of caffeine or something to help with the food coma. So thanks for joining us for this breakout session. We're excited to kick off the afternoon's programming with a really great conversation. My name is Sonja Kellen, and I lead Global Health and Wellness Benefits for Microsoft. So this session, though, isn't really going to be about me. It's going to be about hearing from the panels. As you know from the morning, these are sort of a choose-your-own-adventure when it comes to figuring out which topics you want to deeply engage in around issues of mental health and workplace well-being. We're going to ask you again to think critically and ask tough questions. We're going to save time for those questions. And consider how you can use the panelists' shared wisdom to really make your own workplace safer and more informed and compassionate environment for everyone. So we're planning to take 15 to 20 minutes at the end for questions. Our collective wisdom said that the morning sessions didn't have enough time for questions, so we may lean a little bit more towards giving the time at the end to make sure we're having the dialogue that's important to you. So before I introduce the panel, just a quick note about me, about Microsoft rather. So we're talking about a difficult topic today, managing a mental health or substance abuse disorder at work. And work is a place where we're frequently measured on success and productivity. So having that conversation at work can be challenging, just inherently. At Microsoft, we have nearly 3/4 of our workforce are either engineers or salespeople, where success and productivity is paramount. As a company, I know we're in the press a lot, so I know you're all familiar with who Microsoft is in general, but as a company, we really started shifting about 4 to 5 years ago with our culture. We had a CEO change, and that was sort of the impetus of how we started shifting. And one of the elements of our cultural transformation that stands out most to me is we shifted from a know-it-all culture to a learn-it-all culture. So we shifted from feeling like sort of that historical stack rank, everyone's evaluated robustly against everyone else, and you have to sort of win. Therefore, you have to prove to everyone that you know more than everyone else. And that has sort of fundamentally shifted, both in how we deliver rewards, but in also just how we think about things, and really focusing on how we can learn more. And our mission shifted at that time too, and it became to empower every person on the planet to achieve more. Well, that's a more human-centric mission than our prior mission, which was more about having a PC on every desktop in the US. Sorry, across the world. But as a leader who delivers our health and wellness programs, how we think about the mission is how can we empower the people who empower the people on the planet to achieve more, but also for a life well lived. And that's really our focus. Our panel today is going to be sharing some best practices for employers and managers and how they can do better in supporting employees who come forward about mental health or substance use disorders. You'll hear more from me in the next session that's in the main room. So I'm not going to spend as much time talking about what we're doing, but I want to hear how our panel is thinking about this, and I want to be able to, as the employer, learn from them and what other best practices might I want to bring home to Seattle. So now I'm going to introduce you to our amazing panelists. So at the far end, we have Linea Johnson. She's a mental health advocate and the author of the book Perfect Chaos. In the middle, we have Rwenshaun Miller, founder and executive director of Eustress, Inc. And then right next to me is Dr. Judy Grissel, neuroscientist and author of Never Enough, The Neuroscience and Experience of Addiction. So to get us started, I'm going to start with you, Rwenshaun. Stigma and discrimination are still prevalent concerns among many people who live with mental health disorders. And Rwenshaun, you've done work in this area. What are your recommendations for people struggling with the question of whether or not to disclose?
That's a great question. A lot of times individuals, they're reluctant to disclose that information for fear of being ostracized in the workplace or even some instances being fired. But a lot of times we have to realize, especially as an employer, have to realize that when individuals are dealing with a mental health challenge, when they are able to address them openly within the workplace or even within the home, they're a lot more productive. And so that affects your bottom line. So if the employer is actually investing into their employees to get better, whether that be through EAP or providing the different resources to them like private clinicians or any of those things, it'll eventually help the bottom line of the company, and then individuals will get their work done.
That's great. I like the talk about the bottom line, because at the end of the day, right, that's what the leaders are looking for.
Right.
Yep. Linea, you've talked extensively about living with a mental health disorder and balancing workplace expectations. Can you talk about your experience and strategies that you might have around workplace disclosure?
Yeah, absolutely. I live with bipolar disorder, and I wrote my book about it with my mom. And I initially started speaking in the space of empowerment around young adults in post-secondary, and then from there moved to really look at the workforce, because I think a lot of that empowerment piece can carry over. And we also, in the last session I heard, they were talking about a lot of millennials come in with expectation that now we should talk about mental health. So I was lucky enough to be in a culture where, at least my age group, we expect this change. But I also live with a pretty serious illness, and I had to disclose. A lot of people might not have to, but I've been hospitalized 5 times. I needed accommodations, and so, yeah, having the environment where I could be supported, but also to help myself know with the prevalence that I deserve the rights, and my employers have a responsibility, and that to make sure I have the benefits, and then to feel that empowerment, that this isn't something that we should be ashamed of, which is hard to find. It's a process, for sure.
Yeah. Judy, you also wrote a book, and you talk about the fact that there's no easy way to address the solutions of problems of addiction. I think you talked about how you went into it originally thinking you were going to solve it or cure addiction in some way. But you do suggest that knowledge and kindness can go a long way to helping. How should employers think about that when building wellness programs?
I think I want to build off of Linea's comment about that, because there's a sharp, I think, contrast between addiction and some other mental health disorders, in that she said, I had to disclose because, obviously there was a lot at stake. For addicts, they're singularly the least likely to even know they have the problem. So in that case, and usually the last to know. I hit bottom when I was 23. I had been homeless and kicked out of all these schools, and I thought I would, anyway, long story, but I got clean eventually, and 20 or 30 years later wrote this book. But I think addiction, in my experience, is something that it's not quite contagious, but people don't like to talk about it because they're using too. And it's almost like, if they were to say, do you have a problem or are you okay? First of all, the addict is likely to say, something not very nice. And of course I'm okay, and what about you? So I think it really does require an open-hearted, bi-directional, and I don't know how this is for employers, because I haven't seen that side so much, but a kind of a give and take, like we heard about this morning, where people talked about their own struggles. I think what opens most addicts up to admit their own problem is listening to other people talk about their problems. So in this way, it's not kind of a sick and a well, especially since it's not that there's people who have problems with drugs and people who don't use them. Most people who use them don't have problems. So it's kind of a little bit threatening, I think, to be around someone who's losing control with their drug addiction. And, does that mean we have to have parties that are boring at our company?
Does it make it boring, does it?
Well,
Just kidding.
when I got sober, I thought, am I going to have to bowl? I'm sorry. But what do people do? And, I just to follow up on that really quickly, I think that it was very hard for me to go to any event with alcohol for a long time. And then I noticed, once I sort of got over myself, which took years, I noticed it's hard for other people when I'm at an event with alcohol and I don't drink.
Yeah.
I think it's a little bit like, why do you have to be, kind of the spotlight?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You were talking about that with me earlier, about how there seems to be a social stigma attached almost when you're the one person not drinking, and how you can overcome that. And it's this is something that I haven't thought about a lot in the workplace, right? It seems like all work events come with alcohol, or most of them do. They don't always offer a lot of great alternatives, and besides bowling, to think about that a little bit more.
My husband bowls, so I should just say no offense. But yeah, no, I think it's lonely, and it's also, it seems a little bit, especially when I was newly sober, like I was insulting people, and they would say, won't you have just one? Don't you want something? And now I think I notice, and this, I've been sober a long time, but there's so many ways to get a buzz. And there's really like water or Coke if you're not. And I don't know, that's kind of a bummer. Yeah. Because really, as we heard this morning, 1 out of 8 people in the U.S. are directly struggling with too much drinking. So it's not like it's rare. So it's almost like those people, we're fine with them if they're under the bridge. But if they're at work, we want to be able to party, Yeah. So I sometimes feel like maybe it would be easier for people if I didn't show up.
I remember, maybe it was more like 10 years ago, but every time I didn't drink at a work event, people thought I was pregnant too. Like there's a stigma to not drinking.
And now I'm too old to do that.
They don't think that anymore, maybe, but my kids are older now. I want to go back to you, Linea, about something that you were talking about. It made me think about the cycle that people can get into when they don't disclose, and they have something where they do need an accommodation. And one thing we'll see in the workplace is somebody is not open, not feeling safe about being open with their struggles, and they get in a cycle where they go to a job, they're not open, and then all of a sudden their situation is crumbling, and they haven't disclosed what's happening, and so it's viewed as a performance problem, and leads them to get managed out or to quit before they get managed out, and they're constantly churning jobs because they're not feeling safe or open about it. What can employers do to help people feel safer about these disclosures so that they can get the support they need up front?
That's a great question. Actually, I wanted to add on to what you were saying, not about drinking, but about a culture that kind of celebrates something that can be dangerous. For me, I'm a huge perfectionist. And so being in a culture where it's good to thrive and it's good to push yourself, and I will push myself until I'm hospitalized. And when I talk to people about, I need to do this, they're like, why? But you're such a good achiever. You're so accomplished. And it's like, because I keep getting hospitalized. And so another thing I had been talking about with people is the prevention piece. Before we even have to disclose, we need to think about how to make the it healthy for everyone, right? It's not just people with a mental illness. We're talking about burnout now. And why don't we make it healthy from the start? I think there's a lot going on right now with people talking about wellness in the workplace, and they're talking about, the life-work balance, but they won't actually talk about the specifics. And they're still afraid of saying the word depression, suicide, anxiety. We can say stress, but we can't say anxiety. So I think that we need to kind of take a step back even before disclosure and make it a healthy environment in the first place. I have way more I could say on that, but
No, it's a good point. I mean, I do think wellness is so broad and intertwined when I think about it from the employer angle. I mean, there's the more tactical angles that have more traditionally been gone after. I mean, certainly physical fitness for years, right? Like, we're going to make sure you drink enough water and get your steps in a walking challenge. But there's far less acceptance to date and work around how can we make sure you're staying sort of mentally healthy, or how to make sure that you're taking care of yourself in all aspects.
can I add one?
Please.
And absolutely, that's important. I don't want to say that's not important. Fitness and mindfulness and all of that is wonderful. But I think it's also having a company that has access to services and benefits from the start. If you come into a company that already has amazing mental health benefits, you're going to feel safer disclosing because you know that's something they value.
That's a great point. Just putting it out there as a benefits design is a way of saying we support this, and it's a great point. Rwenshaun, tell me about how employers can ensure that employees don't have to cover or mask themselves and be their authentic selves at work.
That's a great question. I want everybody in the audience to actually think about how authentic you are when you're at work. How many of you can say that you're completely, let's say even 75% authentic when you go to work? Okay, we have I'll say about 15 hands out of a room of almost 100. Personally, whenever I even step outside of my house, I'm not my authentic self. Just because of the fact of battling stereotypes, battling just the fact that I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder back in 2006, and having to deal with those symptoms that go along with that. But then also being a man, that comes with a certain mask, whereas you have to be this productive person, this strong person all of the time. And that times 1,000 when you get into a workplace. Like I said, we actually focus on the bottom line and your productivity and how you actually get the job done, but you don't think about the person as the person. You think about them as an employee, and that's it. And you want them to leave whatever they're dealing with outside of work at the front door, and then come in, perform, and then go back out, and then that's just it. No, we have to actually address that person as such. Oh, you're Johnny. What other things do you have going on? I understand that you have a wife. I understand that you have a significant other. I understand that you have children. And those things come with different pressures. So we talk about just mental health and mental illness, mental health disorders. We also got to talk about the things that cause these problems as well. It's not just a biological issue. It's not just a chemical imbalance. It's the stressors that we put on ourselves. It's the stressors that our jobs put on us to perform 40-hour work weeks, sometimes 60-hour work weeks. When are you going to intervene there and then, create that space so this person can be that vulnerable person? Oh, I need a break. I was on a 2-hour conference call. I need time to go step outside just for 15 minutes. Allow that person to be a person. And then a lot of times, too, that comes down from the higher-ups. The higher-ups have to be vulnerable as well, and not pushing the envelope all of the time, and just understanding sometimes you got to give people a break. And you got to pay attention to what they have actually going on, because sometimes, like Linea said, she'll work herself till she's hospitalized. As if I'm her employer, I have to notice this and step in and be like, no, you need to take a break. You need a day off. You've been working 10, 12-hour days. That's not good. So it comes to the point where you have to intervene, and then the person will feel comfortable to take their mask off and be more vulnerable.
That's great. I was thinking more about this, and we just did a campaign at Microsoft called "It's Okay to Not Be Okay," and it was really focused on mental health and having that conversation. And it's been inspiring to see how many of our leaders have stepped up to help own that conversation. But I was thinking about what you were saying, Judy, and the conversation it seems harder to have around the substance abuse side of things maybe than the mental health. Maybe, I don't know. That's just my gut reaction, is that it's feeling like that's not being incorporated as well into the conversation. Do you have suggestions for how we can better integrate it?
Yeah, I think what's similar is that the old model was very dichotomous. You're either sick or you're well. You're either a drunk or you're no problem. You know, you're a beautiful user or whatever. And I think that's not reality. I think in both cases, people struggle. And in addiction, anybody can become an addict if they use enough. And I think in some ways, the factors that Rwenshaun was just talking about precipitate addiction in people who are vulnerable more quickly, as they precipitate depression or anxiety in people who are more vulnerable more quickly. But we're all kind of on the same road. And I think what's at stake in recognizing that is that I might not be well and free and clear and able to do my life with impunity. You know, there's a lot to lose if we started to think, I'm at risk. And what usually happens, funny enough, is that my dean or somebody's kid or sister or brother, you know, somebody close to them, and then they think, well, maybe I'm not impervious. You know, I was recently at a book signing, and someone came up to me, one person out of, you know, all the people I've been meeting lately, and she said, I have no addicts in my family. I know nobody who struggles with addiction. I was like, you're kidding. We need to clone that person, you know? I mean, what are those genes? Because everybody else knows somebody. And I think recognizing that it's not black and white, that there is this common shared experience of struggle. And the way that expresses is different, but we're kind of all in the same boat. And I think, you know, you're lucky if you're not struggling today, and the reaching out to those who are with something vulnerable, rather than, you know, geez, sorry, doesn't work for you. There's a good example with psychosis and marijuana smoking lately. So, and it's kind of fascinating because I have a bunch of liberal friends. I'm an academic, and they like to smoke their weed, and they also think they're pretty conscientious about social issues. But when it comes to weed, what they say is, geez, it's too bad if you're vulnerable to psychosis and schizophrenia and you can't smoke. But don't touch mine, you know? That's a bummer for you. And I think that view is increasingly untenable.
I think even to add to Dr. Judy's point is understanding that sometimes substance abuse issues and mental health challenges are one and the same. For me, when I was dealing with bouts with depression or psychosis, I would try to drink my way out of it. I would try to drink to numb the pain. I was going through a fifth of tequila every other day, and I did that for about 4 years. I would go to class drunk. I would go to work drunk. But no one checked me on it. Because like we said, it's a social norm for us to, oh, I had a stressful day at work, and, oh, let's go to happy hour, or just, you know, we can, everybody just catch a drink. So it's, and like you said, when you go to the party, you don't want to be that person, oh, I'm not drinking. I still have friends to this day that feel like, oh, just drink, just take a shot, it's just one. Yes. Like, no, I don't, that's not what I need, personally. So understanding that sometimes you have to address the mental health issues that may come along with the substance abuse issues as well.
Absolutely, there's so much self-medication going on, and they're often comorbid. Yeah.
And I think a lot of time when people think about self-medication, they might think about alcohol. I went to school at Columbia just right down the street, and I was a piano performance major. And I mean, Coke and Adderall totally helped me practice more. People don't think about those get overutilized as well. And because my perfectionism and anxiety about performing well, then I was using in this different way that was still masking and still leading to, luckily it didn't lead to full addiction, but certainly my mental health was very much suffering.
And then we also think about high executives that probably do the same thing. So, I mean, that also plays into the culture of if a high executive is, using some type of substance, whether it's an Adderall or anything to stay awake and stay top performing, they're going to expect those things out of everyone that's below them. So if I do this, you need to do it too.
Yeah, and that attitude transcends everything, right? If they are willing to forego sleeping and forego taking exercise breaks or making those a priority, it sort of permeates the organization. And it brings up a question that we struggle with too around how we get our managers to be that person willing to have the conversation. Microsoft is huge, so we have over 20,000 managers. So when we put something out there from an HR perspective, or even from a top-down perspective, how do you get the sort of the middle of the road people who have a team under them and who are setting an example to be better? Like, would you have advice for how you could coach the managers in an organization to have the conversations to help people when they maybe see something that needs help without becoming a therapist?
I think for addiction, it's really important just to ask the question. I've been at many places where it's obvious there's something the matter, and people just look the other way. So I guess, and the question, I think it would be something open-ended, not, do you need anything? Nope, you're okay. All right, thanks, good to hear. But something else. And I also think, Rwenshaun reminded me, but if certainly at Microsoft there are people who've struggled with mental health or addiction, and those people should be invited to serve as liaisons in a way. I think making the bridge between this gap that we aren't used to crossing, really.
Building kind of off of what we were saying earlier, we might see the managers not taking exercise breaks or breaks at all. And I think that modeling piece is so important. And also thinking of yourself as a mentor or as, someone that your coworkers are looking to guide. You need to model the behavior as well. And I might have a boss that says like, oh yeah, take sick leaves, vacation, that's important. But if they never do it, then I'm never gonna do it. And I'm gonna be in this culture that's like, well, they say it, but do they really? And then also I think modeling that vulnerability because, Brene Brown's taking the world by storm talking about vulnerability. And now we're seeing all of these companies and businesses seeing that that's actually really helpful. And who doesn't want a manager that's courageous enough to share, maybe not their whole intense story, but to let you know that they've been there too, that their family, or any small piece of it.
And I think too is it's about erasing the ignorance around what mental health looks like and what are the symptoms. So it's educating the individuals about what certain diagnoses look like. What does depression look like in a certain culture? What does depression look like? And understanding that they look different in different people. And making them aware of those things, but then also allowing them to understand that so they can be compassionate about those things. And then that's even something as small as, well, it's not small, but something like a mental health first aid training. Mm-hmm. Getting everybody engaged with that, even from an HR perspective. When you come on board, you got to go through mental health first aid. That sets the tone for when you're coming into a company, to understanding that, we're going to take this serious. We know what these things look like, but even if it manifests for you in a different way, please tell us so that we can get you the help that you actually need.
Yeah. And I just add one thing to this. Maybe it's obvious, but if important decisions and networking and sharing of opportunities is done after 5 p.m. on Friday to only the workaholics who are there, or at the bar down the street or in the lobby, I think it's excluding the people who are not, in that echelon, who can kind of get away with it for longer. So It's really, I think, important to notice that that everybody has equal knowledge and opportunity, whether or not their behaviors are the same.
So before I open it up to audience questions, I want to give you each one opportunity to just say, like, what's the one thing you want? Pretend everyone here is an employer, since that's the angle we're going for. What's the one thing you want them to take away and really think about or act on as they leave this session today?
I know this is an enlightened crowd, so maybe you all know this, but I think addicts are particularly challenging to deal with because we can be so belligerent and resistant and contrary. And I think two things I would like to say about that. One is that there really is hope. If you had seen me, you would think this person, no point in giving any resources to her. I didn't feel like I deserved them, and I don't think anybody else did either. And I'm a different person today as a result of being able to take advantage of lots of support. And the second thing is that consequences are what got me to the place where I was willing to take that input. And so it's a really fine line between turning our backs and ignoring what's going on and supporting someone. And I think for people like me, it's really critical to say, hey, I noticed you kind of smell funny, or you came back late, or you're not doing the great job. I mean, those things, because we don't see it, we're the last to see it. So your eyes and ears are critical, especially if they come from a place where you're holding up the mirror and offering a path to get help.
I think that, I guess one of the bigger things I'd like to take away is remembering the strength in adversity. And the fact that, as I was saying, who doesn't want a boss that is brave enough to talk about that? But also, as an employee or as someone you're hiring, that's where innovation comes from, right? Is diversity and adversity. If we think about Microsoft and the woman who helped make Skype better because she was visually impaired. There's all of these different things that we can learn when it comes to accessibility or different life experiences that can only make your company better.
I would say, starting off with the fact that you are a person, and understanding that your employees are people too. Understanding that they may need help, their families may need help, and there's different factors playing into how their behavior manifests, whether it be in the workplace or at home. So just creating that atmosphere where it's okay for them to get that actual help. But then also understanding that you're not immune to it. You may be that person that needs that particular help. You may be the person that needs it, but you have the resources to get it. So do your employees have their resources to get the help that they need? So just thinking about those things when you're implementing these policies and all of these procedures, but then also as you cultivate this environment that individuals have to work in at least 40 hours a week, and they're spending most of their time with you and not with their families.
That's great, thank you. So now I'd like to give you guys an opportunity to ask the questions and see what else you want to learn. There's a mic in the middle, and I think that we need to use the mic for the recording. So feel free to go to the mic and go for it.
My question is, can you guys share, I guess, the worst experience you've had with someone who approached you concerning, your battle and past with substance abuse and then your battle with bipolar depression? What's the worst response you've ever had to where it might have made you fall deeper into depression or substance abuse? And
I can go first. I think that one of the worst, I also have an eating disorder. I have anorexia, and one of the worst things that I had was while I was in graduate school. I know this is not work, but it was, focused around getting a degree for work. And one of the people I was going to school with, I said something about, oh yeah, I'm trying to gain weight. And they're like, why would you need to do that? You look great. And it was that same thing of saying, like, your perfectionism is good for you. Why would you try to get better if your mania makes you a better worker, if your anorexia makes you skinny and pretty, and that just perpetuates it when people cling on to, those things they think are positive, but actually are very harmful. And I think that we don't talk enough. We don't talk enough about any of it, but we don't talk enough about, those things that people see as positives. And then the best thing I think I've ever had is I had my supervisor just say during our regular check-ins, how's it going? And for me, my deadlines, I want them to be done a month ahead of time. And so for him to be like, I think that can take 2 months. That was really helpful for me. And for him to check in and look at, to see the negatives in overachieving,
I would say for me, probably the most disrespectful would be the passive, remarks to if you let someone know that you're dealing with some type of issue. Oh, just suck it up, or you get over it, or especially in our community. Oh, just pray about it. It's that passive night. It makes me feel like, I hadn't tried to do this before. And I would say probably the best thing that has been helpful in recovery, which constantly in recovery and constantly learning about myself, is someone just asking me, how can I help? Not even trying to provide a solution or saying, oh, you need to do this or you need to do that. How can I help you? For some people, some of my friends, it's even the point, I just need you to sit with me. I don't want you to talk. I don't want you to, say anything. You ain't got to look my way. Just sit there. And sometimes I just need that. So someone just asking me, what do I need, instead of them trying to tell me what I need based off of their inexperience.
I was more or less unemployable when I was using, so I don't have examples from that exactly, but I do remember the day I got my PhD, I defended my thesis with these guys in a room for 5 hours, or maybe it seemed like 5 hours, and I walk out of the room passing, and the grad students were around, and everybody looked really awkward, and they said, we just don't know what to do to celebrate because you don't drink. And I was clean about and sober probably 7 or 8 years then. And my first thought was, that's right, I should have a drink. It was so lonely, It was like nobody, isn't it interesting that the way we celebrate is to mute? It's fascinating. And it came out okay, but I think the loneliness. And then I have another experience where much later I was working someplace and a guy I worked alongside with was loaded around students. I'm at a university, and I brought it to the chair who knew my story and my experience, and he said, I'll take him out for a beer and we'll talk about it. So I think just building bridges, any kind, and even though it's awkward to talk about, all my good experiences are those where I feel like I can practice a little more authenticity, and that happens in the context of someone being real with me. That's great.
Next question.
So my question is about disclosure in the workplace. So there's research that shows there's actually negative consequences of not disclosing, because it's an emotional labor and burden that you're having to expend from hiding that information from your manager. So if you have a supportive manager, they can empathize with you, connect you to resources, and have some context to
You would have to have a diagnosable illness, or a disability, but with the ADA, the American Disability Act, you can't actually legally get the accommodations without disclosing. So that's a case where you need to disclose. Again, that gets complicated because you have to actually qualify as having a disability. So for me, that's made a huge difference. And then also, again, under the ADA, knowing that they're not supposed to, that they aren't supposed to discriminate if I do that. And I have protections with that as well under the ADA. So I think that, again, it gets complicated because whether you fall under the ADA or whatever, but knowing your rights and also the workplace policies, your rights within the workplace, knowing those rights as well, I think can make disclosure easier and helpful.
I like that there's data around that too. I wasn't aware that there's some science behind it, but if you can't bring your true authentic self to work, you're not going to be as successful as you could be otherwise. And I think it's a good reminder. Next question.
Yeah, so my question kind of piggybacks on the previous one about the best experience and the worst experience. And I'm curious as to what was it about the situation when you finally did feel comfortable, responding to someone's concern? Because so many times you'd be like, no, I'm fine, I didn't get a lot of sleep last night, or like some other excuse, but like it takes a lot of courage to say, yeah, I do have a problem. So could you talk, of course all of you, could you talk about what it was that led you to, respond at that certain time?
For me, it was my final suicide attempt. Attempted suicide 3 times, attempted to overdose twice, and then the last time I put a gun in my head and pulled the trigger, and it jammed on me. None of my family or friends, or even my employers, addressed the issues or the signs that they saw beforehand prior to that. So it was something that was above me that kept me here. That's how I was able to have that eye awaken a moment, and me get the help that I actually need. So even now, I'm very receptive to my friends when they're, or even coworkers or employers when they come and they're saying, well, I noticed that you're a little off today, or you're mighty quiet, so what's going on? So being open and, letting them know what's actually going on, or even sometimes telling them, I'm just having a bad day, I don't feel like talking about it, and they're being respectful of that and not trying to push the envelope and trying to make me talk about something, because then that pushed me to another edge. So for me, it was actually my suicide attempts that allowed me to get to that point, but then also that pushed me into, like she was saying, you turned it into your sobriety, into actually, exploring the field more. For me, it was for me to go get my licensure and become a therapist, and then also pursuing my PhD in psychology now to understand this a little bit more. So that was it for me.
Yeah, I think hitting bottom for me too, and I guess I've said enough about that, but I don't think, these things are so hard to face, and especially if nobody around you wants to see them, that there's really a zillion ways to sort of put it off, until you hit bottom, so you say. And for me, it was the consequences. I couldn't live with my drug use, was obvious, and I couldn't live without it. I didn't know how. So I was, stuck, which gave me a little bit of an open mind, and I was lucky that I did have resources to learn from.
I have to say, hitting bottom as well, and I just think about, isn't that sad that for all 3 of us it was hitting bottom? We should not have to get to that spot. And for me, I think it was hitting bottom several times. Being hospitalized and then realizing, you were talking about how with addiction you don't always see it right away, and same with my depression. So having coworkers, family members that can see the red flags maybe before I do. And after hitting bottoms enough times, realizing, okay, maybe you guys know what you're talking about. Maybe I'll trust you, or, it's sad that we have to get to that point. That's a whole larger conversation, I think.
Next question.
So the title of this session says, should I tell my boss? Should I tell my boss, right? So, I'm a student, so I'm getting my degree in marriage and family. So, and I found out the question as well, so I'm very sensitive to signs and when you can see that a person may be struggling mentally. So what if it is your boss? That you can see signs and even in their productivity at work, on work, maybe some other alcohol, things like that. So at this point, if you're struggling mentally, you can't talk to your boss because it's clear that your boss may struggle mentally. Everyone else may not see it, but you do. So, in a work environment like that, how do you, before disclosing, before getting to the point of disclosing your weaknesses or mental struggles, how do you prepare yourself to go into a work environment knowing that this is probably not the best place to disclose, yet this is your best work, this is where you are, this is where you probably will be for some time. So how do you cope internally, or how do you prepare yourself for the workday, knowing that you're going into an environment where you should be able to trust or depend on your boss when they are the ones who struggle with mental health? I hope that wasn't mine.
Get support. Get support, all the support you need, massages and friends and therapists and whatever. I think, there's a huge resistance to seeing the kinds of things you're talking about. And I think to try to do it alone is too stressful. I've tried several situations like that, and it usually doesn't go well. And I think it's because people don't see it until they're at the bottom. So I don't know, but take care of yourself.
Everyone's favorite, it depends. I think also if you're in a company that's large enough, talking to HR, I think is also really important to know that, HR, some places is better than others, but that they can also support you with that.
And I will also say, definitely take care of yourself. Create a routine for yourself before you go to work, but then also schedule your breaks in between times so you're able to, have that release and then continue on with your work day. But then also, finding that support system and document stuff. Especially if your boss has a boss, document these things so that, you make sure if something were to happen, you have your own paperwork to, justify why you feel certain ways about certain things.
Hi, thank you. My question is around communities of color. I'm from Mexico City, and one of the things that came up earlier are around religion and also this concept of choice, particularly around domestic violence. When I think about how that affects mental health and how pervasive it is in communities of color, how can we help really people understand within these communities that is more than praying and it is more than a choice and the judgment that comes with it? So I just welcome your advice on that.
I think it's a great example because it's the sort of same thing we're talking about. There's just a collective denial about all three, about domestic violence, about addictions, about mental illness, other mental illnesses. So I think I'm really appreciating this day so much because I think there is a sea change coming, partly because so many people are suffering and hitting bottom, but also because there's so many people who, as a result of their own suffering or their families or their employees suffering, are willing to reach out. And I do think that we're in the midst of this transition where from kind of hiding all our shame to asking for help and sharing it. And I guess that gives me a lot of hope.
For me, I would say we have to work within our communities. We have to work within our cultures. So sometimes if someone is just saying, just pray about it, okay, well, we'll pray about it, but then also let's try this as well. Or utilize, whatever entities they, whether it's their pastor or whatever, utilize them, educate them on the importance of, mental health or domestic violence and all of those things. Use them as a medium to address these issues, because sometimes they may not listen to us because they want to just pray about it. But if you use a medium where they actually go and listen to, educate those individuals and allow them to deliver that message.
I can't really speak to the community of color piece as much, but as a white woman, I think not to educate myself and listen to people within the community, not expect those individuals to have to teach me but to learn about kind of the white supremacy that's surrounding it and the how I can listen to communities better and support communities better, knowing that I have privilege. I know that's a uncomfortable thing for some people to talk about, but.
And then too, also understanding that however we address these issues, whether with therapy or medication and all of those types of things, understanding that looks different for communities of color. For me, when I'm providing therapy with my young black boys, we're going to play ball, or we're going to work out and those types of things. I know if I try to get them in my office and sit them on the couch and tell me about your day, that's not going to work. That's not going to work. So using alternative methods to reach them so that they can understand what's actually going on, and then they'll start talking to you a lot, and you'll understand. You get them engaged in something that they enjoy. And then they'll start opening up to you because you build that sense of trust. Our community is all about building trust first before we disclose anything.
I just have to begin by saying I appreciate your comment about people saying just pray about it. And then beneath it all, don't ask me to fast. The comment I want to make is kind of between a question and a comment, and it's quite related to the question that was just raised. The theme of our session is building a compassionate environment around employee mental health. And I find myself a little bit torn about that word compassionate. Certainly it's the right way to be with employees in this situation, and then on the other hand, in a way, compassion always sounds like we're going over and above what we would need to be, or what we ought to be, I suppose. And what I'm trying to say, I guess, is that it's not like it's an option. What we're really working toward at the end is a just environment. And the question is kind of what does that look like in the context of mental health issues and substance abuse and so on. I welcome your comments on that, if that makes sense to you.
Thank you for that. I mean, working in the larger disability community, I think a lot about, special treatment and thinking about compassion versus just treating us all like a human, right? We don't need to go over and above to make sure Linea's okay and doing extra well. Just treat Linea like any other human that has different needs in the workplace, right? So while compassion, of course, is important for every human, we don't just need to have compassion for those with mental health or substance abuse issues. We should just have compassion for everyone, because someone might lose a parent, someone might, have any number of things happen. So thank you. I appreciate that.
I appreciate the question too, and I want to maybe say to myself that we've been sort of purposely unconscious, because I guess it's just easier not to deal with things that are hard. And I guess what I feel, is on the way to compassion. So I think justice is the goal. But what compassion adds to that for me is just like a little opening of maybe what would it be like for me? Or you and I are the same in a way, or we're connected in a way. So I think it's on the way to getting away from this notion that they're over there, poor things, and I'm over here, safe and sound. And so I do think compassion is a way of opening our hearts to the struggles that others are having. And so recognizing, I guess compassion and recognition are sort of two sides of the same coin for me on the way to justice.
I think we have time for one last question. So perfect timing. We have one person in line.
Thank you to all of you for being part of this panel. I find myself emotionally watching and being part of this discussion. I have 3 observations that I'd love to have your comments on. First is the literature I've read talks about people with lived experience versus caregivers making choices. The people with lived experience will always go for the gusto because when they feel well, they want to make up for a life that couldn't be during symptomatology. The second piece of that is internalized stigma that a lot of people with lived experience don't necessarily live up to their full training potential because they're scared of the next episode. And the third is once you self-disclose, how does that stigma about them versus us from your employer? Are you okay? Can you handle this? And watching yourself perhaps being not chosen for a lead on a project or something because you self-disclosed. So that's kind of the question about do you have any tools about advice for employers that folks have self-disclosed to or your own experience of living in with symptoms or without and full functional potential.
It's a great question. I have not a terrific answer, but I'll get it over with so I don't have to be the last one. I think we all need to give each other and ourselves a break. I mean, this is hard stuff. And we haven't got the resources. We just haven't done a very good job. And I have a saying to myself all the time, if I don't do it gracefully, that's okay. If I don't do it smoothly and well, it's okay. I just have to make the effort. And I give myself a big berth for not being perfect and not doing it well. And I think employers probably need to give themselves the same thing because this is new.
And I think we also, as employers, need to recognize the fact that no matter what, even in any company that we're doing, it's a team effort. So if you put in a certain individual as a lead on certain things, you're doing it because of certain strengths that they have. And so, but then also you building a team around them that can pick up the other pieces. So understanding that aspect of it, but then also being able to you're not coddling the person, but you're asking them, having a real conversation, asking them, what do you feel that you're capable of? If I put you in this certain position, what assistance would you need for me to help you thrive? And so having those real conversations instead of, oh, I'm not going to give it to you because I think you're going to crash and burn, or I'm going to give it to you and hope that you crash and burn so that I can get rid of you. So those you have to want to empower the individual to thrive and succeed. And whether that takes 2 other people to help them do that, that's fine. Because you never know what other things that you can get out of that person once they feel that empowerment and they feel like they can really do something. By then, they're investing in your company then. And you have a loyal employee for however long. And that goes a long way.
I think that you answered the employer piece so well. I'll speak to the employee piece. And there's so many parts to your question. But I definitely deal with that. Now that I'm healthy, I have to make up for the times that I was sick. And we talked about the team, but and my husband's sitting in the front row, that's why I keep pointing. It really, I think, is having that community that can call me on it and say, you're self-stigmatizing. I mean, I've been in therapy for years and years. I've been an advocate for 10 years, but there's still times that I need my husband or my coworker to be like, no, you're overdoing it. Or maybe you're stigmatizing yourself and the other person isn't actually stigmatizing you. So I think that, having that team, whether it's your coworkers, your family, your friends, for me as an employee, that piece is really powerful.
Thank you to the panelists for sharing your expertise and your experiences. Thank you to you guys as well for the insightful questions. And I think now we're all moving back to the main room for the 2:30 start. So thanks, guys.